Data providers love to measure things. That's what they do. They give data, they provide data, then they can give you a measurement and charge you for it. So yeah, so you can measure a firm on many things. For example, we could measure what is quantum's impact on the environment. Even though we're not a factory, we consume electricity. We're shooting a video right now. There's charging going on. We're using power. We can work out what is our power bill for the full year. We know the cost of power. So we know how many units of power we've consumed. We know how much paper we're using every year. We can work out what that paper cost in terms of carbon footprint, how many trees were knocked down to make that paper. So we can make a measurement in some sense, even though we're not a factory, even though you don't think of us as a bad polluting company, we're doing some harm to the environment from what we're doing. And of course, if you're a company that is using water to make power, for example, all power companies need a huge amount of water to cool all the pipes, to cool the heating systems in the power plant. You can measure how much water they need. Where's the water coming from? Well, it's not coming necessarily, from the sky. It's coming from dams, it's coming from the ground, from the earth. So we're sucking up water. You can measure things. And when you measure them, you can then say, okay, there's a standard that is okay and acceptable, and recognize that. And this is too high, and the best in class does this. And everyone kind of gravitates towards the best of class, metrics, and tries to find ways to get there. They make a conscious decision to get there, as opposed to who's counting, who cares, who's checking. So now if you begin to shame quantum by saying, hey, for a company of your size, you're using too much power. So maybe we start to shut the lights in the office more often and try to consume less power, right? Maybe you find that the power plant that is using a lot of water is using excessive water compared to a power plant 200 miles away, 300 kilometers away. So maybe you get them to say, hey, listen, you're using too much power, too much water. Look at the power plant 200 miles away, 300 kilometers away. They're using a lot less water because they're doing this. Why don't you spend money to implement that? So there are ways to bring that E, once you measure it, into some kind of a range which becomes acceptable to society, acceptable to regulators. On the social side, the obvious thing is the role of women. The role of women in the board, the role of women in the company. Are they paid the same? Are they treated the same? Is there an expectation, and this is also true in the Western world for all their advancement, that despite the fact that women tend to do the same work as men in the West, they tend to get paid 20 to 30% lower than what a man gets paid for the same job. So gender inequality and moving towards gender equality. Are you using child labor? Are you exploiting people? Are you being mean to them? Are you not giving them comfortable work surroundings? That's all the S factor. And you can measure all these things, right? These are all very, very sort of measurable. Can you give me databases on salary for women, salary for men for doing the same work? And you can compare them. And you can compare across sectors and companies. And G, of course, is governance. How do you treat? So right from your regulatory filings, are you filing on time? Are you doing the right things? Have you broken some laws? Have you filed your taxes on time? Are you treating minority shareholders who may have only 2 shares in a company versus a majority shareholder who may own 80% of a company shares? Are you treating them the same way, right? So all of these can be measured, and databases exist for all of these things. Quantum took the path in 2013-14 that we should build our own databases. So while there are service providers, we asked for sample reports on companies that we know have poor, for example, governance. We know their governance is pathetic, governance is poor, and we're not very likely to give them a high rating and therefore not buy their shares in the quantum mutual fund portfolios. And when we asked for those sample reports, we got glowing reports from them because these are big companies. And just because they're big doesn't mean they must get a high number in our view. So we decided, we don't trust the external service providers. Let's just build our own team. So we built databases on companies' annual reports in the late 1980s and early 90s when we started Quantum. And then we began building databases on ESG from 2014 onwards.
mutual fund investments are subject to market risks. Read all scheme related documents carefully.